The first thing Evan felt was the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. The second was the sting of humiliation as a dozen phones rose like a wall around him, tiny red lights blinking hungry for his shame. He stood in the middle of the supercenter entrance under those bright fluorescent lights that showed every stain, every wrinkle, every tear in his faded uniform. His mop bucket was on its side, dirty water spreading under his boots like a dark halo. The store manager was shouting. A security guard gripped his arm too tight. Someone in the crowd laughed when they heard the word thief. "Sir, you're under investigation for tampering with the power systems," one of the officers said, loud enough for everyone to hear. They were treating him like a criminal in the same building where he scrubbed their floors. Behind the officers, a group of young people in expensive jackets watched with smug, satisfied faces. Evan's heart pounded so hard he could taste metal. He thought of one thing only: his son. If this stuck, if they put this on a report, if it went to court, he could lose everything. Then a calm female voice sliced through the noise. "That's enough. Take those cuffs off him, right now." The entire entrance went quiet. Every phone lowered, every eye swung toward the woman walking in from the parking lot like she owned the place. Because in a way she did. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Now let me take you back to where all of this really started. On a normal weekday, no one looked twice at Evan Cole. He was just the night custodian at Riverbend Supercenter on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. 39 years old, a little too thin dark hair going gray at the temples' shoulders, carrying more than any mop ever did. He clocked in at 3 p.m., clocked out after midnight, and somewhere in between, he cleaned up after a city that never bothered to learn his name. Trash cans, restrooms, break rooms, loading docks. If it was sticky, spilled, or broken, they called the cleaning guy, and Evan showed up with a bucket and a quiet, "Yes, sir." What nobody saw was the rest of his life. The alarm going off at 6 a.m. so he could make pancakes for 11-year-old Mason before school. The stack of overdue notices on the kitchen counter. The framed photo by the sink of a smiling woman with a ball cap on backwards, Lena, his wife, who'd never made it home from a rainy highway 3 years earlier. Before the accident, Evan had been something else entirely. A licensed industrial electrician at a manufacturing plant on the South Side. He used to read blueprints, troubleshoot systems, and sign off on work other guys were nervous to touch. But grief, and a boy who woke up screaming for his mother at 2 a.m., had a way of rearranging a man's life. So he took whatever job let him be there for Mason. Less pay, less pride. More time to walk his son to the bus stop and sit in the school auditorium for band concerts. He told himself it was worth it. Most nights when the store got loud with impatient customers and barking managers, Evan just let their words slide off. He wasn't there to win anyone's respect. He was there to keep a roof over their heads and the heat turned on through Ohio winters. He didn't drink, didn't go out, didn't complain. He just worked, then went home to the little 2-bedroom rental where Mason's drawings covered the fridge and the couch springs squeaked when they watched old movies together. But beneath all that quiet, there was a line in Evan that hadn't broken yet. A line about dignity, about how you treat the people who clean up after you, about the kind of man his son was watching him become. That line was tested on a Thursday afternoon in late October when the store manager called him into the back office. On the wall behind the desk was a poster about Customer Appreciation Night with big red letters and a smiling mayor shaking hands. "We're hosting a special event tomorrow," the manager said, without looking up from his screen. Local officials, business owners, some big donors. I need this place shining. You'll stay late, cover the whole floor, and keep out of the way. Understood? Evan nodded. Yes, sir. What the manager didn't mention, what Evan only learned when he saw the updated schedule taped to the break room wall, was that the mayor's son and a cluster of wealthy 20-somethings were planning to turn that night into their own private spectacle. And when their bored eyes drifted over the polished aisles and landed on the quiet man with the mop, they smiled in a way that meant trouble. Evan noticed the first sign of trouble before most people would have given it a second thought. It happened late Friday afternoon, the day of the Supercenter's Customer Appreciation Night. The store was already buzzing with folding tables banners and nervous employees smoothing their uniforms. The mayor's office had confirmed attendance. Local business owners were coming. And the store manager had been pacing since dawn, like a man preparing for a visit from royalty. Evan was in aisle 14, tightening a loose floor plate near the freezer units. A small thing, but loose metal on tile, was an accident waiting to happen. He worked carefully, quietly. It was the kind of task he'd done 1,000 times in his old life: industrial systems safety checks, preventative maintenance. Only back then people thanked him for preventing problems. Now most customers stepped around him as if he were part of the shelving. He was gathering his tools when he felt the tap. Not a gentle tap, not a curious one, more like someone summoning a dog. He turned and saw 3 young men in matching polos wearing badges that identified them as special event volunteers. They weren't employees. They were part of the mayor's son's circle kids who'd grown up around golf courses and private schools, now eager to play important for one night. You're blocking the aisle, the tallest said, gesturing impatiently. This section needs to be spotless in an hour. Evan nodded. I'll be finished in a minute. Just securing the floor? We didn't ask you what you were doing. Another cut-in with a smirk. We said this needs to be spotless. A third boy, barely 20, probably tilted his head, as if studying a creature in a zoo. Is this the same guy who was mopping the entrance yesterday? They stared at him, waiting for irritation, defensiveness, anything they could twist into disrespect. But Evan only lowered his eyes and said, I'll clear out now. He collected his toolbox, the one thing from his old career he'd refused to sell, and moved aside. Their laughter trailed behind him as he walked away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd heard that tone enough times in the past year to recognize it instantly, the sound of people who didn't think you were a person at all. I'm fine, he told himself. Just get through the shift. But he wasn't fine, not really. His jaw tightened. His chest felt oddly hollow. Those boys were younger than some of the trainees he used to supervise in electrical workshops. Back then, people respected his judgment. They asked him questions. They followed his lead. Now he was the cleaning guy. He'd given up far more than anyone in that store knew. And for the first time in months, the thought stung. At 5 p.m., he clocked out of the break room for a quick call home. Mason usually finished homework around that time, and Evan always made a point to check in before the evening rush. Dad Mason answered breathless the way he sounded when he'd been running through the house. Hey, bud. Everything okay? Yeah, Mason said. Guess what coach said I can try out for the travel team this year? Evan smiled softly. That's great news. I'll need new cleats, though. Mason's voice trailed off, cautious. But maybe I can use the ones from last season if I put tape on the toes. Evan closed his eyes. He knew exactly how worn those cleats were. He'd glued the soles twice already. Don't worry about that right now, he said gently. We'll figure it out. There was a pause. Dad, Mum, you sound tired. Evan swallowed. Just a long shift. Is it because of the event tonight? Mason asked. You don't have to go if it's too much. A tiny ache formed behind Evan's ribs. Mason knew him too well. He always had. It's okay, Evan said more firmly this time. I'll be careful. You just focus on practice. I'll see you in the morning before school. Okay. Love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo. He hung up and stood there for a long moment, staring at the break room lockers. Travel team. $50 fees. Equipment. Gas for all the weekend tournaments. He wanted to give that to his son so badly it hurt. But wanting didn't make the numbers add up. Not yet. He took a breath, steadied himself, and went back to work. The event began at 6:30 sharp, and the store transformed into something almost unrecognizable. White tablecloths, balloons, a temporary stage in front of the seasonal aisle. The mayor's staff fluttered about, adjusting signage and tasting finger foods the catering company had brought. And in the middle of it all stood the mayor's son, Aaron Prescott, 24 years old, wearing sunglasses indoors and giving instructions as if he ran the entire county. Evan tried to keep out of his way. He stuck to the perimeter, wiping down the soda machines, emptying small trash cans, polishing handrails. He didn't make eye contact unless spoken to. He stayed small. And still, trouble found him. He was wiping smudges off the automatic doors when Aaron's voice rang out. Hey you, the maintenance guy. Evan turned. Aaron stood with his friends' boys in varsity jackets, girls in sleek dresses holding plastic cups filled with samples from the sparkling cider bar. We've got a problem, Aaron said, crossing his arms dramatically. The lighting by the stage is too dim. My dad doesn't want to look like he's announcing a hostage negotiation. One of his friends snorted. Evan nodded. I can check the fixtures. Might need to reset the just make it brighter. Aaron interrupted, waving a cupcake at him dismissively. It's not rocket science. Evan headed for the breaker panel. Behind him, he heard one of the girls whisper, You'd think they'd hire someone who actually knows what he's doing. Another voice chimed in. Well, he's probably doing the best he can, for his kind of job. The heat crawled up Evan's neck. He kept walking. He found the panel, adjusted the dimmer circuit, and brought the lights up by 20%, enough to brighten the stage without washing out the decor. When he returned, Aaron gave the lights a cursory glance. Good. That wasn't so hard, was it? Evan said nothing. Not out of fear, out of exhaustion. These were the moments that chipped away at a person's small humiliations layered on top of real responsibilities and real grief. No one knew that he could read the entire electrical schematic of that building blindfolded. No one knew he could fix the generator in half the time it took their hired contractors. None of it mattered, because they didn't look at him long enough to see anything at all. Around 7:15, the store filled rapidly. Local business leaders shook hands with city officials. Cameras flashed. Employees stood in the aisles offering samples and smiling until their cheeks hurt. Evan stayed near the loading dock to mop up a spill from a cracked soda case. It gave him a bit of distance from the crowd, which he appreciated. Then he heard the voice that always meant trouble. Don't hide back here, one of the event volunteers jeered. We need you up front. You missed a spot near the bakery display. Evan wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve. I'll get to it as soon as I finish. No, the volunteer snapped. You'll get to it now. People are watching. Something in Evan's throat tightened. He finished the spill cleanup in silence, pushed his cart toward the bakery area, and reminded himself again that losing his temper would cost Mason far more than it would satisfy. When he reached the bakery, he saw the spot they were talking about. A crumb. A single crumb from a sample cookie that a customer had dropped. They'd dragged him across the store for that. He knelt down, wiped it up, and stood again. And that's when he saw the smirks. The same group of young volunteers were watching him, arms crossed, whispering to each other and glancing at their phones. Were they recording him? His stomach twisted. He didn't want Mason growing up in a world where people filmed someone kneeling just to mock them online. He didn't want to be anyone's entertainment. But the more he avoided their gaze, the bolder they became. One boy stepped closer. "Hey, what's your name again?" "Evan?" "Well, Evan," the boy said slowly, savoring the familiarity he hadn't earned. "We're going to need you to stay visible for the mayor's arrival. Just stand near the entrance and look productive." "Why?" Evan asked quietly. "So the guests know the place is being managed." The word hit harder than an insult. Managed. Not supported. Not maintained. Not improved. Just managed like clutter. He walked to the front without another word. But with each step, a pressure built in him, tight, hot, and familiar. He'd felt it the night he left his old job after Lena's accident, when he told his supervisor he couldn't work rotating shifts anymore. He'd felt it standing in the funeral parlor, holding his son's hand, promising he would find a way through. Pressure wasn't new, but this pressure had edges, sharp ones. At 8 p.m., the front entrance was packed. Cameras were ready. The stage lights glowed brighter than usual. Evan stood off to the side, mop in hand, trying to blend into the wall. He saw the mayor approaching from outside, shaking hands, smiling, making small talk with reporters. And behind him, walking with easy confidence, was a woman Evan had never seen before. Short, silver-streaked hair, dark blazer, no badge, no volunteer lanyard. She wasn't part of the mayor's staff, but everyone parted for her anyway. She looked around the store with an expression that wasn't impressed or impatient, but observant, sharp, quietly powerful. Then her gaze landed on Evan. Just for a moment, only a heartbeat. But something in her eyes shifted when she saw him standing there, shoulders slightly hunched, mop balanced carefully, so it wouldn't be in anyone's way. Recognition wasn't the right word. More like awareness. As if she saw through the uniform. As if she saw the man. He looked away quickly. And that's when the next blow landed. A sudden shout. A clatter. Gasps from the crowd. Evan spun just in time to see a volunteer lunge for his bucket as a joke, knocking it sideways with his foot. Dirty water cascaded across the entrance tiles, spraying Evan's pants and shoes, splashing onto the mayor's polished loafers as he stepped inside. People froze. Cameras pivoted, and the room shifted in an instant from festive noise to sharp, uncomfortable silence. The volunteer pointed at Evan. He did it. He wasn't paying attention. Evan stared at the spreading puddle in disbelief. He hadn't touched the bucket. He knew it. The volunteer knew it. But the crowd only saw a custodian and a mess. His breath caught in his chest as dozens of eyes turned toward him, waiting for him to defend himself, or break down or accept blame he didn't owe. Mason's voice echoed in his mind. "Dad, you sound tired." The pressure reached its limit. Something was coming. Something big. He could feel it in the way the room held its breath, in the way the mayor's staff scrambled, and in the way that silver-haired woman stepped forward with sudden, deliberate purpose, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. The silver-haired woman stepped toward the spill with a look that made the air feel heavier, but before she could speak, the crowd reshaped itself into something far more dangerous than annoyance. A ripple of alarm moved through the entrance. A child cried out. Then someone screamed. The sign, "Watch the sign." Evan looked up and his stomach dropped. The temporary metal truss holding the event's decorative lighting had begun to sway. One of its top clamps, loosened earlier by the volunteers adjusting banners, had snapped free entirely. The whole frame leaned, trembling wires, straining lights, flickering violently. Below it stood a cluster of guests, including 2 elderly women, a mother with a stroller, and the mayor himself. The volunteers froze, unsure what to do. The store manager shouted orders no one followed. Guests stumbled backward in panic. The entire structure creaked, tilting another inch. If it collapsed, it wouldn't just ruin the event. It could crush someone. Someone small. Someone helpless. And in the brief, piercing scream of the baby in the stroller, Evan heard another voice layered beneath it, one shaped by memory. "Dad, you sound tired." Mason. The boy who depended on him for everything. The boy he had promised silently, stubbornly, that he would never let down again. And without hesitation, without calculation, Evan Cole moved. He dropped the mop, sprinted straight into the heart of the crowd, past people shouting, past hands trying to pull away, past the volunteers who shrank back like the danger was contagious. The woman with the stroller was trying to drag it backward, but one wheel caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled, panicked, screaming for help. The truss groaned and dipped lower. Evan didn't hear anything anymore except the thundering of his own pulse and the echo of every oath he'd ever made to protect, to provide, to be the man his son could look up to. He reached the woman just as the front leg of the lighting rig buckled. "Take the baby," he barked, not in anger, but in command, the trained voice of a man who'd once coordinated emergency repairs on dangerous factory machinery. She lifted the baby into her arms. Evan yanked the stroller away with a single hard pull, his shoulder protesting, but the wheel popped free. Another clamp snapped overhead. People screamed. He shoved the woman and stroller toward open space. "Go." Then he turned back toward the collapsing structure, not away from it. The crowd gasped as he lunged directly under the sagging beam. "Sir, move," the store manager shouted from somewhere behind him. "Get out of there." But he didn't move. Instead, he grabbed the central support pole, hundreds of pounds of weight shifting above it, and wedged his body beneath the crossbar. Metal groaned in protest. Wires sparked. The whole truss threatened to shear sideways. Evan's feet slid on the wet tile from the earlier spill, but he dug his heels in, lifted with his legs and back, and every muscle he'd earned from years of hauling conduit, installing cable trays, and carrying his sleeping son from the couch to bed. His jaw clenched. His breath tore through his chest. But the structure stopped falling. It wavered, unstable, dangerous, but held for the moment. "Somebody get those people clear," Evan shouted, voice straining. That snapped the employees out of shock. 2 clerks rushed in to guide the nearest guests away. Security began pushing back the crowd. A few volunteers stumbled backward, stunned, their earlier smugness erased entirely. The mayor had been pulled to safety by his staff, shaken but unharmed. But the rig was still shifting above Evan, threatening to slide sideways and crush him instead. He didn't care. He focused on the frame, on the logic of its joints, on the center of gravity, and where the weight distributed old instincts rising like muscle memory from a past life, where solving problems like this kept entire production lines running. "Kill the power to the lights," he called. "Witchbreaker," someone yelled. "Left utility panel row, C middle switch," he answered without hesitation. A second later, the overhead lights cut out. The rig stopped sparking, the danger reduced, but far from gone. He adjusted his grip again, grunting as the metal dug into his palms. The silver-haired woman who had watched everything unfold not only moved toward the chaos, she stepped right up beside him. "Tell me what you need," she said sharply. "Stabilizer straps." Evan gasped. They used them to mount the banners. They're still on the supply cart. I'll get them." She sprinted faster than most people half her age. The truss shifted again, tilting away now, threatening to swing like a pendulum. Evan braced himself, shoulders trembling. Something inside him whispered that he couldn't hold it forever. But he didn't let go. Because even if his body broke, even if they didn't remember his name tomorrow, even if he walked home sore and limping, Mason would know. Mason would know who his father was. The woman returned with the straps. Another employee, finally grasping the severity, helped her loop them around the remaining intact points of the frame. "Pull it toward you," Evan shouted. Slowly, slowly. Together, they tightened the straps, easing tension from his shoulders. The crowd held its breath. Metal protested, squealed, shifted, and then finally mercifully steadied. The rig no longer threatened collapse. It was wounded, crooked, ugly, but stable. Only then did Evan release the beam, stepping back with shaking arms and sweat dripping down his temples. He bent forward, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. The tile was still damp beneath his boots. The mop bucket still lay overturned. The store smelled like sparkling cider and fear. But no one was hurt. The baby was safe. The guests were safe. And the woman with the silver hair was staring at him with an expression he hadn't seen directed at himself in years. Respect. Recognition. Something like awe. He didn't know who she was, but everyone else suddenly did. The mayor's staff whispered her name. The volunteers went pale. The store manager stiffened like he'd swallowed a marble. She turned toward Evan, her voice steady but full of something deep. "You just prevented a disaster," she said quietly. "If that frame had gone down, we would have had multiple injuries, possibly worse." Evan shook his head. "I just did what anyone—" "Not anyone," she interrupted. "You." Before he could respond, the store manager rushed over, his panic evaporating into defensiveness. This wouldn't have happened if maintenance had been doing their job, he snapped loud enough for the other employees to hear. Evan's stomach twisted. The volunteers exchanged nervous glances, some guilty, some calculating. But the silver-haired woman stepped sharply between them, her presence cutting the manager's momentum in half. "Is that your assessment?" she said, her tone cool enough to chill the air. The manager faltered. "Well, yes. Our custodian," he gestured toward Evan-left equipment unsecured. It caused the chaos. The room erupted in murmurs. Evan's throat closed. He'd held up a collapsing metal structure with his bare hands saved. A mother and child prevented a mass injury, and still he was the easiest person to blame. He felt the old shame rising, the familiar heat in his eyes. But the woman didn't look at him with pity. She looked at him like someone who already knew the truth. And the volunteers who'd knocked his bucket earlier, who'd loosened the clamps, who'd blamed him, noticed the shift in the room too. One of them took a step backward. Another whispered urgently, "Oh my God." She saw everything. The woman finally spoke. Her words landed like a hammer. "No," she said to the manager. "That's not what happened, and you know it isn't." The crowd fell silent again. She pointed not at Evan, but at the cluster of nervous volunteers. They tampered with equipment they were not trained to handle. They caused the instability. "This man," she motioned to Evan, "saved your guests from a catastrophic collapse. I watched it happen." The mayor turned toward her. "Ma'am, forgive me, I don't believe we've—" But he stopped. Recognition lit his face. Because now he knew who she was. Everyone did. The name whispered through the crowd. People straightened their clothes. Phones lowered. Volunteers went pale. The woman extended a hand to Evan, not as a gesture of assistance, but of acknowledgement. Something had shifted in the room, an axis turning. The custodian no longer blended into the corner, and the moment he took her hand, the balance of power in that store changed in a way that no one, least of all Evan, had expected. The consequences would come fast, and nothing in his life would stay the same after this. For a breathless moment, no one in the store moved. The lighting rig, suspended now by straps, tilted but no longer lethal, hung like a warning above the entrance. Beneath it, Evan stood with trembling arms and sweat glistening along his jawline, his breath ragged but steadying. People stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. The mother he'd shielded clutched her baby so tightly the child's cries faded into small hiccups. Her eyes were locked on him wide, stunned, overflowing with thanks she hadn't yet found words for. Employees whispered to one another, their earlier fear morphing into disbelief. Did he just... He held that thing up. How did he even... The volunteers, the very ones who'd taunted him minutes earlier, stood dead still, as though rooted to the floor. Their faces were blotched with panic guilt, and something colder, the realization that their actions had nearly created a tragedy. The store manager was the only one who tried to regain control. He stepped forward, tugging at the hem of his vest as if the fabric could restore authority. "Everyone, please calm down," he blurted, but his voice wavered. We have to follow procedure. We'll need an incident report, statements, and an apology," the silver-haired woman said sharply. Her voice cut through everything like clean glass. The crowd parted when she stepped forward again, and for the first time, every eye shifted to her. Evan straightened, not because he felt ready, but because her presence demanded it. She didn't look at the crowd, or the manager, or the volunteers. She looked only at him. I saw everything she said, her voice low but resonant. "You prevented multiple injuries. You stepped into danger without hesitation. You used training that most people in this room don't even recognize. And you did it with more competence and courage than anyone responsible for this event." Evan blinked, absorbing the words, but unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Not anymore. The woman turned to the volunteers. "And you three, you caused this." She pointed not angrily, but with the calm precision of someone accustomed to exposing the truth. "You tampered with equipment you weren't trained to touch. You lied. And then you blamed the only person who saved you from serious consequences." The volunteers shrank visibly. The store manager opened his mouth as if to object, but she raised her hand, silencing him with nothing more than a look. She turned back to Evan. "Tell me something," she said. "The way you stabilized that rig, the way you assessed the load distribution, that wasn't guesswork." Evan swallowed, unsure how much to share. "No, ma'am. It wasn't." "Then what was it?" she pressed. For a moment, Evan considered brushing it off, downplaying it, letting the moment pass. But the weight of the day settled on him. Every insult, every dismissal, every assumption about who he was and what he could do. And something inside him, that stubborn line he'd protected all these years, refused to bend anymore. So he lifted his chin. "I was a senior industrial electrician," he said quietly, "before I took this job." Gasps rippled through the crowd. 10 years on the floor at Halberd Manufacturing. I oversaw high-risk repairs, heavy equipment systems, electrical load distributions, safety protocols." He paused, exhaling slowly. "After my wife died, I couldn't keep the rotating shifts. I needed to be home with my son." The room exhaled with him, softly, painfully. The silver-haired woman nodded slowly, as though confirming something she had already suspected. "So, you're not just a custodian," she said. "I am a custodian," Evan corrected gently. and proud to be one. His voice strengthened. But that doesn't mean I stopped being who I was before. Skills don't disappear. They just get quiet. That landed harder than any shout could have. All across the entrance, people lowered their eyes. Some out of shame, some out of respect. Some because they finally understood the depth of what had been standing right in front of them for years. One of the clerks, barely 19, whispered to his coworker, "I had no idea. I just thought he'd, mopped floors." The baby's mother stepped forward. "Sir," she said shakily, "you saved my child." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know how to thank you." Evan felt heat creep up his neck. "I just did what anyone, not anyone," the silver-haired woman repeated firmly. A hush fell again. Then the mayor approached, his expression solemn. He extended his hand. "Sir," he said, "I owe you my life as well. I was directly in that fall zone." Evan hesitated before shaking it. He had seen mayors shake many hands before, but rarely did they look humbled. "I don't know how I can repay you," the mayor continued, "but I intend to try." Before Evan could respond, the store manager blurted out, "Mayor Prescott, I assure you we will discipline the custodian for causing—" "Stop talking," the mayor said flatly. The manager's mouth snapped shut. The crowd turned their attention to the woman again. "Are you going to tell us who you are?" someone asked timidly. She nodded. "My name is Catherine Rhodes." And the room reacted. Phones were lowered, spines straightened. The volunteers looked like they might faint, because everyone knew the name. Catherine Rhodes, CEO of Rhodes Industrial Solutions, one of the largest manufacturing safety and innovation firms in the Midwest, the same company that had recently partnered with Halbert Evans' former employer, the same woman whose safety protocols were used in half the factories in Ohio. The store fell into a stunned silence. Catherine faced Evan again. "You recognized the structural danger before anyone else. You executed a load-bearing intervention with no tools and no backup. You knew exactly which breaker fed the lighting rig. You prevented a catastrophic accident that would have made headlines tomorrow." Her eyes softened. "You should not be doing a job that hides your talent." Evan felt the words press against something deep inside him, something he'd tried to bury when the world had demanded survival over purpose. "I took this job because it let me be home with my son," he said, "and because it was what I could get." "I understand," Catherine replied. "But your skill set, your instincts, your experience, they're wasted here." The store manager sputtered. "Now hold on, he signed a contract." The mayor turned, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "Not another word." Catherine continued ignoring the manager entirely. "I've spent the last decade searching for people who know how to prevent disasters before they happen," she said. "People who have seen danger up close. People who understand systems in their bones. That's why Rhodes exists." Her gaze held Evans for a long, steady beat. "What I saw tonight," she said softly, "was a man with extraordinary judgment and courage. The kind of man my company and this community needs." The volunteers manager, and even several city officials, stared at Evan with a new kind of silence. Not dismissive, not mocking, not pitying. Something closer to reverence. Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her intensity. "You once kept an entire manufacturing line safe," she said. "And tonight you kept a room full of families safe. I want you on my team, Evan." A murmur swept the crowd. The store manager nearly choked on his own breath. Catherine reached into her blazer and retrieved a small card. It was simple. Matt White. Her name embossed in silver. She placed it carefully into Evan's shaking hand. "My office will make room for your schedule," she said. "For your son. For your life. If you choose to come work with us." He stared at the card, as though it might vanish if he blinked. He cleared his throat. This is a lot. I know, she replied gently. You don't have to decide tonight. She stepped back, letting him breathe. But the crowd didn't step away. Instead, they stepped toward him emotionally, if not physically. The clerk who'd once walked around him like furniture wiped his eyes. The volunteers looked at the floor, ashamed. The mother with the baby reached for his arm helplessly, as though words were too small for what she felt. And above them all, the broken lighting rig hung like a monument, not to failure, but to the moment a quiet man revealed a strength no one imagined he still held. Catherine turned to the crowd. This man saved your lives tonight, she said simply. Remember that before you judge anyone by the uniform they wear. Then she faced Evan one last time. Think about my offer, she said softly. But whatever you choose, know this. She paused. You are not invisible. Not anymore. And with that, she walked away with the mayor, leaving the store trembling with the shift she'd set into motion. Evan stood alone in the entrance, the business card warm in his palm. A new possibility had opened in front of him, one he hadn't dared dream about since the night the world changed for him and his son. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be the life he'd resigned himself to. It would be something entirely new, something earned, something his. For the next several minutes, the store felt strangely quiet, not because the crowd had thinned, but because the energy inside it had shifted. Employees who once brushed past Evan now paused to thank him. Customers touched his shoulder, offered their names, told him they were glad he was there tonight. The mother with the stroller hugged him briefly before hurrying out, still crying softly into her baby's curls. Even the mayor lingered nearby, exchanging a few hushed words with Catherine before shaking Evan's hand a second time. If you ever need anything, he said, you come to me directly. It wasn't political. It was personal. As for the volunteers, the bold, loud group who moments earlier strutted around the event like a private club, they stood near the broken rig in a cluster of shame. The tallest boy stumbled forward, voice cracking as he tried to apologize, but the store manager cut him off with a glare that left no doubt their night wasn't ending with a photo op. Security escorted them out, not as criminals, but as young people who needed to learn that carelessness could carry consequences. The manager turned back toward Evan, his face flushed with equal parts fear and regret. For once, he didn't have a rehearsed line ready. I misjudged you, he whispered. I'm sorry. The words sounded stiff, like he hadn't spoken them to anyone in years. Evan didn't hold on to the moment. He simply nodded and said, let's make sure nothing like this happens again. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. By the time the crowd dispersed and the police finished taking statements, the store felt smaller, quieter, almost reverent. Evan stood alone in the break room afterward, staring at Catherine's card in his palm. The clean, pressed lettering shimmered under the fluorescent lights, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that felt bigger than survival. He didn't call her that night. He waited until morning when Mason padded into the kitchen in socked feet and sleepy eyes, plopped into a chair, and asked why his dad looked like he hadn't slept at all. Evan slid the card across the table. I think he said carefully that our life might be about to change, for the better. Mason picked it up, squinting at the tiny silver letters. What's Road Solutions? He asked. A place Evan answered where they see more than what's on the surface. When he told Mason what had happened, carefully simplifying the frightening parts, the boy didn't blink. He didn't ask about money. He didn't worry about the shift schedule. He just reached across the table and grabbed his father's hand, squeezing with all the strength an 11-year-old could muster. "I knew you weren't like everybody else," he said. Evan had to turn away for a breath before he answered. 3 months later, the snow had begun melting off the pavement outside the Road Solutions regional campus, a wide, glass-fronted building that shimmered in afternoon light. Workers came and went in steel-toed boots and neon vests, clipboards in hand, safety glasses perched on heads. Inside, Evan walked through the halls, not as a custodian, not as a stopgap worker, but as the newest safety systems coordinator in the electrical division. His badge read his full name. His new uniform, cargo pants, dark jacket, and steel-toe boots felt strangely familiar, like slipping into a life he thought he'd lost forever. The first week had been hard. There was a mountain of software and updated procedures to learn. And for someone who'd spent years blending into the background, it took time to raise his voice in meetings. But Catherine had made good on her promise. She assigned him a mentor, adjusted his hours so he could be home for Mason, and checked in personally more often than he expected. "You didn't step into danger because of training," she told him one afternoon. "You stepped in because of who you are. We can teach the rest." Word spread quickly around the company about what he'd done that night at the supercenter. Not as a legend, but as a story people told when they needed to remember why safety mattered. Why one person's judgment could make all the difference. At home, life changed in quieter ways. The overdue notices disappeared. The taped-up cleats were replaced with a new pair Mason wore proudly to his first travel team practice. Evan started waking up without a knot in his stomach. He began cooking real breakfasts again, scrambled eggs, bacon toast that wasn't burnt. Sometimes he even whistled. One evening in early spring, stepping off a site visit, Evan pulled out his phone to see a text from the store manager at the supercenter. "We replaced the lighting equipment. New safety protocols. Your idea. Thank you." He didn't know how the man got his number, but he smiled anyway. A year after the collapse, the mayor invited Road Solutions to a community forum on workplace safety and emergency readiness. Catherine insisted Evan join her on stage, not to relive the night, but to address the 100-man crowd of business owners, school leaders, and factory supervisors who wanted to learn how to avoid disasters of their own. When Evan stepped up to the microphone, he felt his pulse in his ears. Public speaking wasn't his strength. But then he spotted Mason in the front row, legs bouncing with excitement, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. And just like on the night of the collapse, the fear quieted. He told the crowd about unseen skills, about the workers whose talents went unnoticed because they weren't wrapped in titles or polished shoes. He talked about how people deserved dignity no matter what they earned or what uniform they wore. He spoke softly, but he spoke with the weight of a man who had learned something the hard way and carried it into something better. When he finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm, steady, real. Later, as father and son walked to the car, Mason bumped his elbow lightly against his dad's. "I think Mom would have liked that," he said. Evan looked up at the sky, soft with early stars. "I think she would have too. Some stories end with a hero saving a crowd. But the truth is simpler. Sometimes the real victory is a man remembering who he is after the world has shrunk him into someone smaller. Sometimes the win is a child watching his father stand tall again. And sometimes the greatest change comes from one moment, a moment when courage rises, not because anyone is watching, but because doing the right thing is the only thing left. And if there's a lesson in all of this, maybe it's just this. You never know the whole story of the person sweeping your floors. You never know what strength they carry or what they've had to set aside to get through the day. But respect has a way of uncovering the extraordinary inside the ordinary. And every once in a while, the person the world overlooks becomes the one who holds everything up when it matters most.